Chapter 22. Gabe secured the last of his saddlebags to the horses. He'd focused on the horses, putting off the confrontation with Lopez as long as possible. They had to travel lightly and quickly to find Fortune before the snow fell. Luckily, his horses were tried and true in the elements and used to living outside in the harshest of weather. The thoroughbred, however, could be a challenge. He'd bring a rope halter with a long lead in case he had to pony him, first aid supplies, alfalfa pellets, and replaced his gun in his special holder. Gabe never wanted to use it, but if the worst happened and Fortune was suffering, he would be the one to do it and save Imogen the guilt. This whole situation was his fault for letting Lopez stay and hide out for so long. He should have given her a couple days to mope and then shoo her on her way. What had he been thinking? He knew what he'd been thinking, he thought, shaking his head. He thought only of helping a friend, who was like family out of a tough situation. He could blame his PTSD and terrible sleep. The nightmares were always worse in winter and when he was under stress. But that wasn't fair. Gabe had always prided himself on his loyalty. Lopez had earned it by having his back in the field, but Imogen had his back every day. She'd always supported him, and he'd violated that trust. He hadn't given any thought to how his girlfriend would be affected or made to feel having a strange woman with a history in his home, or that it might be misleading for Lopez. They both deserved more. Imogen deserved that he give her everything. If she gave him a chance to fix things and explain, he'd open up and tell her everything. Why he didn't want her sleeping over and seeing him wake in terror. His time overseas and, yes, his parents' deaths. Gabe had to decide if he was going to continue holding back or if he was all in with their relationship. He was terrified. He'd never completely bared his soul to anyone, not even his sister. But losing Imogen forever was more terrifying. The sheriff pulled in, lights flashing, and broke him out of his heavy ruminations. Gabe left the horses tacked up but tied to the rail so they could eat and drink until he was ready to go. He gave Dexter a pat, then walked over to greet his friend. The man in question stepped out of his vehicle and donned his hat, a wide-brimmed fedora that shaded his piercing gray eyes. "Hey, John, thanks for coming." They shook hands, then embraced in a one-armed hug. Gabe patted him on the back. Sheriff Jonathan McCall took in his friend's rugged appearance before eyeing the broken body splayed on the ground and the gate hanging precariously. "I see you've got a situation that went bad." "You could say that, my friend." John was always the master of understatement. Bad was nowhere close to describing an attempted kidnapping and a dead body. Once, when he was a teenager, John got hurt on his dirt bike, almost losing his arm to compartment syndrome, and he referred to it as his little incident. "Looks like I am too late for the fun. Want to tell me what happened?" The sheriff's face was blank and unreadable. "I do, but honestly, John, I don't have a lot of time. I have a victim inside the house who needs to give a statement and a loose horse I have to find before the storm hits." John watched him intently. "So, who got this guy, you or the victim?" He looked around, taking everything in with eagle eyes. He hadn't been sheriff long, but he had been a deputy for years before being elected. He was fair, patient, and believed in the justice of the law. He really didn't need murder on his books, but it looked like his life was about to get a whole lot more interesting. Gabe shook his head, running a hand through his hair with impatience. He didn't want to blame the horse, but he couldn't lie. "He attacked my guest, his ex-girlfriend, and we got into a fight when I found them. The horse broke out and ran him over. That's the nutshell, but it's a long story. Do me a favor, grab Lopez's statement and I'll give mine as soon as I'm back." John had known Gabe his whole life. He wouldn't put him off when he had a job to do if it wasn't important. He nodded. "And how long do you think that might be? Should I stick around?" Gabe shook his head. "I want to say yes, but this horse is a runner and he had a big scare. I have no idea how far he's gotten. If we can't find him tonight, we'll have to head back here and start again after the snow stops to be safe." "We? Who's going with you?" "My girlfriend. It's her horse." "She tough enough to handle this, Gabe? This storm is no joke. We're telling people to stay off the roads." "She's tough. And she's madder at me right now than a cat in a cold bath, so her adrenaline's pumping. Trust me, we'll be fine. Just keep an eye on Lopez. She's had a tough go of it, and I can't stay to check on her." "You got it. I'll keep an eye on your friend." He paused. "Gabe." Gabe had already started for the horses again, but paused and looked at his friend. Time was working against them. He had to get Imogen, and then they needed to track this horse. Reality would be there when he got back. John's eyes were intense. "We'll need to sit down and talk as soon as you get back." Gabe nodded. "I understand, and appreciate you giving me the time to get this horse back to safety." He'd never doubted it. John had been the one to take in strays as a child. He might be tough as nails on the outside, but he was a sucker for the four-legged beasts. It was that soft spot for animals Gabe relied on. Otherwise, he would have forced him to sit down and get a statement immediately. Now, hopefully Lopez would cooperate. Maybe he should give her a heads up before he left. With a deep sigh, he changed course and headed into the house while the sheriff was focused on examining the body. The kiss was a real problem, Gabe knew. Lopez had never shown any interest in him. He viewed her like a sister, and there had never been any flirtation between them before. What was that kiss? He walked slowly up to the porch, not wanting the confrontation, but having to say some things before he could go. This wouldn't be easy, and he needed to be clear. "Lopez?" He called out as he entered the house so she wouldn't be startled. "Here." She was washing her hands, scrubbing them until they were red. He waited while she finished and turned around, eyes downcast. "Listen, hey." Both spoke at the same time. He motioned for her to go first. Anita sighed. "I was way out of line. I'm so sorry." Gabe stood motionless, eyes unreadable, with his hands in his pockets. "I should never have kissed you like that. I was just so relieved that it was over." But it wasn't over for him. Gabe couldn't bear to think that Imogen would believe that he would cheat. He'd made a lot of mistakes in his life, but this one beats them all. Having his loyalty questioned, and rightly so, hurt. He rubbed a hand over his face. "I appreciate the apology, I really do, but the damage is done." She opened her mouth to speak, eyes brimming with tears, but he held up a hand to stop her. "No, don't say how sorry you are again. I know what can happen after a life-and-death situation. Your adrenaline was pumping, but your actions may have ruined my relationship. A relationship with someone I want to spend my life with." Anita bit her lip, and a tear spilled over. "I know. I'll talk to her, I promise. I'll apologize to her, too." Gabe didn't want to kick her while she was down. She'd been traumatized enough, but he needed to put his relationship first for once. "I think you should do that. I don't know if it will help, but I'm sure it would be appreciated. First, I have to go catch this horse." "He saved me." Anita wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to control her emotions. "He did. Fortune's behavior alerted me there was something wrong, and him breaking out the way he did. Well, I would never wish that on anyone. We're lucky that your attacker was the only one physically hurt." "Dead, you mean?" It wasn't a question, but she noted it softly. "I can't believe he's dead." "The sheriff is here to file a report and get your statement. He's good people. Don't leave anything out. Anything at all." She nodded, but he pressed her. "You have to open up about it all." "That's going to be really hard. I hate to admit the things that happened, that I let happen." "It's not your fault. He did this to you, period. You know that, right?" Tears brimmed in her eyes, but he didn't go to her. Instead, he nodded to punctuate his point and turned to leave. "Wait, where are you going?" Anita ran around the kitchen island and placed a restraining hand on his arm before realizing what she was doing and snatching it away as if burned. "I'm getting Imogen and going after Fortune. He can't be left out in the storm tonight." He stepped back from Lopez, putting more space between them. "I owe her an explanation and an apology, but first I have to get her horse back, or it will all be for nothing." "When will you be back?" Gabe looked at his watch. "As soon as possible. I have to go. But one more thing, and I don't want to seem uncaring. but you need to pack your bag. The sheriff will drive you to my sister's place. You can stay with her for a few days until the investigation clears." Lopez nodded. "I guess that's fair. I need to get back anyway and get my life in order." "I think that's a good idea for all of us." He walked to the front door and held it open before turning around. "And Lopez?" "Yeah?" "Take care of yourself." "I will. Thanks for everything, Gabe." Gabe closed the door, not looking back. It was time for him to leave his past behind him as the memory that it was. He had a future he wanted to build, and a furious redhead he needed to convince.